Yes, folks, I'm wearing a mask today to point out the obvious, and I'll get to that in a moment. Now, I'm absolutely convinced Jacinda Ardern is deliberately prolonging this lockdown to make sure it goes past the 4 weeks. Now, we all know she's implemented these draconian rules, but she's not really enforcing them with penalties. And she's been told for over a week now that everyone entering New Zealand should be, or has to be, quarantined. And she's only just thinking about doing that as we speak. And she's still following the WHO recommendation when it comes to face masks, that face masks are not necessary for everyone. Even though around 25% of people carrying COVID-19 can be asymptomatic. These people are walking through your supermarkets as we speak, breathing over all the fruit and veggies and everything else. And apparently COVID-19 enters the body through the eyes, the nose and the mouth. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this out, that if you cover your nose and cover your mouth, you reduce the chance of catching this virus by 2/3. But no, Jacinda Ardern prefers to get her advice from communist a-holes like this. Now folks, I'm not even going to comment through this video because it speaks for itself. Also, I've posted a link to it in the description below.
The 70th World Health Assembly, on the nomination of the Executive Board, appoints Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus as Director General of the World Health Organization.
Dr. Tedros Adhanom. Who the hell is he, really? You've surely seen him on TV by now, being a darling of the mainstream media and all. Dr. Tedros is the highest-ranking medical official in the world during this time of global pandemic. But unlike most medical officials across the globe, he isn't even a real medical doctor. In fact, he's the first ever to lead the World Health Organization without a medical degree. Tedros is simply a communist academic, and I'll get back to that in a sec, who has never cured a patient in his entire life. But of course you wouldn't know that, because the mainstream media doesn't want you to question the UN, WHO, China cabal. See, Tedros, he's actually a politician who hired a public relations firm in the United States to help him get the lucrative top job at the WHO. Mercury Public Affairs put together a snazzy presentation for him to deliver to the global body, but when it came time for him to answer questions, well, let's just say it didn't go too well.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Dr. Tedros, for your presentation. You focus on fragile states and hard-to-reach settings, but with very little clarity on the WHO mission in terms of the development agenda. So how can we translate your views in terms of a development candidate? Thank you.
Sorry, but the question is not clear. Can you clarify, if I may ask? Sorry.
How can you better explain your claim of being a candidate from the South, a development agenda candidate?
When you say that candidate, linking it to sustainable development goals?
I would like to ask you, which technical cooperation areas do you regard being the nice-to-have or so-called the pet topics of the member states in which the WHO is currently active, and you see the least value added in the organization action? Thank you.
Sorry, can I ask? Maybe if you can repeat, not clear, or if you can.
During times of crisis, the mainstream media will be the first to wave their arms and scream and shout and freak out, saying that we shouldn't be criticizing the experts. But thankfully for me, Tedros Adhanom is anything but an expert. Rather, he's a communist revolutionary who oversaw a violent government in Ethiopia from several senior positions. From health minister to foreign affairs, Tedros routinely used his power for self-promotion at the expense of his people. But don't take it from me. Take it from one of his subordinates in Ethiopia back when he was health minister. Despite their position in the government bureaucracy, they penned an essay about how, quote, Dr. Tedros left the Ethiopian health sector very much politicized and crippled, which must yet be depoliticized if it is to function properly. This resulted in Ethiopian healthcare facilities that were funded by you and I, by millions upon millions of dollars in foreign aid, where doctors, quote, used their smartphone flashlights to help deliver babies at night and had no running water to wash their hands after treating an infectious patient. That is the legacy of Dr. Tedros. Back in Ethiopia, when he was only responsible for the death of his own citizens, he was a ranking official in the Tigray People's Liberation Front, TPLF, a party that is basically Ethiopia's version of the Communist Party of China. People's liberation and all. The TPLF was so cruel, inhumane, and deadly that it was, quote, listed as a terrorist organization by the United States government in the 1990s and is still listed as one by the Global Terror Database because of its unfortunate habit of carrying out armed assaults in rural areas. See, Dr. Tedros' government oversaw the forced relocation of 15,000 people. As it tends to be with forced relocations, it didn't end very well, for the people, that is. It sparked massive protests in 2016, where Human Rights Watch documented the brutal regime killing its own people in the street, curb stomping them, bagging their heads, and shooting them. Tedros says that the global community blew this way out of proportion and got in a fight with the Human Rights Watch in a series of public letters. Now, this will sound like a parody, but it's all true. Here's Tedros' letter. Quote, Human Rights Watch encourages opposition violence in Ethiopia. That's from the Ethiopian Ministry of Foreign Affairs while Tedros was leading it. Human Rights Watch has deliberately given impressions and made claims that they know to be false, totally didn't happen, about the recent events, notably the Eritrea tragedy on October 2nd. Now I'll define two words there for you. Eritrea is the Ethiopian version of Thanksgiving, and a tragedy is an unavoidable disaster. Does this look unavoidable to you? Of course, dictators of feather fly together, and Tedros' vile behavior extended across the entire continent of Africa. When the president of Kenya was set to be on trial at the Hague's International Criminal Court, well, Tedros rallied the leaders of Africa's dictatorships to say that they've rejected the double standard that the ICC is applying in dispensing international justice. That's a quote. Tedros told the delegates, quote, we underscored that sitting heads of state and governments should not be prosecuted while in office. That's what Tedros said. He actually believes that. Just a few months after the brutal killings and human rights violations in Ethiopia, Tedros stumbled his way to the leadership of the WHO. Now, of course, he didn't get there on his own because he's a gross incompetent. He's displayed that throughout his whole life. He got there with the help of China.
Anything is possible. Let's get to work together for a healthier world. Thank you so much again. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
According to Washington Post columnist Frida Gaitis, China worked tirelessly behind the scenes to help Tedros defeat the United Kingdom's candidate for the WHO job. That was David Nabarro. Now, Tedros' victory, she says, was also a victory for Beijing, whose leader, Xi Jinping, has made public his goal of flexing Chinese muscle across the globe. Now, what was the first thing that he did when he got the top job? Well, of course, he nominated Robert Mugabe to the position of UN Goodwill Ambassador. You, of course, don't need me to remind you who that thug is. He's the dictator who single-handedly oversaw the demise of Africa's breadbasket.
President Emerson Mnangagwa was in charge of internal security during the Gukurahundi massacres, where thousands of people were killed, allegedly by forces loyal to Robert Mugabe, the former president.
Executed dissidents with his Fifth Army, a North Korean-trained death squad, and was an agent of China himself. The Chinese were the muscle behind Mugabe's installment as dictator for life. And this nomination wasn't just a nod to his fellow African dictator, it was a nod to China. It was the first of many favors that he's done for Xi Jinping, the most recent being the cover-up of this global pandemic. Giving China's African dictator a Lifetime Achievement Award was a move to solidify China's geopolitical power within the United Nations. So that was then. Since the beginning of his political career, Tedros relied on a cabal of East Asian communists in Africa, from the Chinese to the North Koreans, to prop up his African dictator pals. I guess we shouldn't be surprised that his loyalties haven't really changed. Leopards don't change their spots. He is rotten to the core, and the world is currently paying the price for it with the lives of our families and elders. You may have seen this tweet by now. Everyone across the world is scratching their heads as to why Dr. Tedros' WHO lied to the world on January 14th, saying that human-to-human transmission just wasn't a thing, even though it was obvious that it was. It took them until January 23rd, after global outcry, for them to turn course and come clean instead of lying for China. Imagine if governments mobilized then to secure PPE for their healthcare systems instead of scrambling to do it now. That wasn't even his most recent blunder, though. Tedros' outright refusal to call the rapidly spreading disease a pandemic to avoid embarrassing his Chinese overlords caused untold problems. Not until March 11th, when a total of 114 countries were reporting over 110,000 cases of Wuhan pneumonia, did the WHO finally cave and call it a global pandemic. Tedros isn't just a villainous communist who ran a government that killed their own in the streets. He was also accused of covering up several cholera epidemics in his home country when he was health minister. Bad press, not good, you must understand. By now, you must be seeing the trend here. I think it's put best by John Martin.
Yes. Now, folks, I've posted a link to John Martin's video and article in the description below as well. And hat tip to FF for that one. And when you get there, or if you get there, scroll down and see how much research he has put into it. It's really quite impressive.
Who said, in a sane world, instead of leading a global organization, Tedros and his cronies would be put on trial at the International Criminal Court and tried for his crimes, and if found guilty, should spend the rest of his life in prison. The last thing, the last place he should be is running the WHO while the entire world is dealing with this global pandemic. It's no wonder that now a global petition has been signed by over 700,000 people calling for Tedros' resignation. He has blood on his hands, both back when his communist government slaughtered their own people in the streets like animals, and now, when the world's most vulnerable are cowering in seniors' homes, suffocating to death at the hands of an inept Chinese bootlicker.
Without question, folks, this guy should go to jail for the rest of his life. And Xi Jinping needs to financially compensate the West for what he's done. Or even better, the West needs to stop trading with him, period. But no, our globalists would prefer us to be under his thumb forever.